The old veteran collapsed on the concrete, his weathered hands barely protecting his face from impact. The mechanics laughed cruelly, treating his humiliation like cheap entertainment. Nobody intervened, but they had no idea. Just hours later, the rumble of military vehicles would shatter their arrogance. Robert Bob Anderson adjusted his faded Marine Corps cap as he eased his 1982 Chevrolet pickup into Miller's Auto Repair. The June heat reflected off the cracked parking lot concrete. At 65, Bob moved deliberately, not from fear but from wounds earned decades ago in conflicts whose names most Americans couldn't pronounce without stumbling. The truck, like Bob, had seen better days. Its once vibrant red paint had faded to a rust-tinged burgundy in places, with patches of bare metal along the wheel wells. But it ran stubbornly, reliably, just like the man who'd owned it for 30 years. Bob carefully stepped down from the driver's seat, his left knee reconstructed after a Beirut bombing in '83. Protesting with each movement, he reached for his wallet, removed his veteran's card, and walked toward the garage office, his limp barely noticeable to anyone not looking closely. Near the repair bay, 3 mechanics in grease-stained coveralls stood drinking coffee, eyeing the approaching old man and his aged vehicle with undisguised contempt. They were young men with tattoo-covered arms never earned in combat, looking for distraction on a slow Tuesday morning. "Check out Grandpa's dinosaur." One called out, "Probably older than my dad." The others snickered appreciatively. Bob ignored the comment, keeping his eyes forward as he'd done under far more dangerous provocations. He had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Inside the office, he approached the service desk. "Morning," Bob said politely. "Truck's been running rough when it idles. Wondering if someone could take a look." The service manager glanced up from his computer, taking in Bob's weathered appearance and the ancient truck visible through the window. "Got an appointment?" he asked without real interest. "No, sir. Hoped you might have time today. Won't take long to diagnose." The manager exchanged looks with another employee. "We're pretty backed up. Might be a few days before we can even look at it." He gestured at the nearly empty service bays. Bob understood the unspoken message, but persisted. "I'd appreciate whatever you can do. She's been reliable for 30 years. The service manager sighed dramatically. "Look, honestly, we don't really work on vehicles that old. Parts are impossible to find, and frankly—" He paused, glancing at Bob's veteran cap. "It's not worth the investment for either of us." "Just a diagnosis would help," Bob said quietly. "I can handle the repairs myself if I know what's wrong." The mechanics who had been outside entered the office, still smirking. The tallest one, whose name tag read Derek, spoke up. "That thing even passed inspection? Looks like it belongs in a scrapyard, not a repair shop." Bob looked up, meeting the young man's gaze with clear blue eyes that had once sighted through rifle scopes in defense of freedoms this young man took for granted. "Still runs," Bob replied simply, turning his attention back to the service manager. Something about Bob's calm dismissal ignited anger in Derek. "Hey, old-timer, I'm talking to you," he said, raising his voice. "This isn't a retirement home parking lot." The service manager did nothing to intervene as the other mechanics moved closer, forming a loose semicircle around Bob. A customer waiting in the corner looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "Just need a diagnostic check." Bob said evenly, "No trouble." "No trouble," Derek mocked, knocking Bob's veteran card from his hand. It skittered across the floor. "Trouble's already here, Pops." Bob bent down slowly to retrieve his card. As he reached for it, Derek shoved him hard, a casual, cruel gesture that sent the elderly veteran sprawling onto the concrete floor. Bob's palm scraped against the rough surface. His hips struck the ground with enough force to send a jolt of pain up his spine. Stars danced at the edges of his vision. The mechanics laughed. That particular laugh of the young and strong, who have never tested their strength against worthy opponents. "Look at him," one snickered. "Can't even take a little push." Around them, life continued. The waiting customer hurried outside. A passing delivery driver looked away. The service manager disappeared into his office. Bob lay there for a moment, not from inability to rise, but from the crushing weight of realization. This was what he had fought for. The freedom for people to look away when the vulnerable needed help. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed himself up. A thin trickle of blood ran from his temple, where he'd struck the edge of a metal chair. He didn't wipe it away. Instead, he straightened as much as his old injuries would allow, got back into his truck, and started the engine. The mechanics moved aside, disappointed by his refusal to beg or cry out. As Bob pulled away, their mocking laughter followed him like shadows stretching in the late morning sun. What they couldn't see was the steel in his eyes. The same unflinching resolve that carried him through firefights long before these young men were born. What they couldn't know was that Robert Anderson had never been a man who sought revenge, but he had always been a man who recognized when a line had been crossed. Bob drove to Jefferson Square, a small park at the center of town, and found a wooden bench beneath a maple tree. From his pocket, he removed a handkerchief and dabbed at the blood on his face. His left arm ached from the fall, and he could feel bruises forming along his hip. A group of school children on a field trip passed by, their teacher guiding them toward the town's small museum. One child noticed Bob's condition and started to approach. The teacher quickly redirected the child with a gentle but firm hand on the shoulder. Bob pretended not to notice the small rejection, though it stung more than his physical injuries. He had never expected gratitude for his service, but basic human kindness shouldn't require extraordinary circumstances. From his wallet, he carefully extracted a faded photograph, handling it with reverence. The photo showed 6 men in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, standing before a helicopter. Despite the dirt and exhaustion evident on their faces, each man smiled with the intensity of those who know exactly how precious a moment of safety can be. Bob was on the far left, younger and stronger, but with the same clear eyes. On the back, faded handwriting listed 6 names and a simple phrase: Recon Team Eagle, the ones who came home. Behind the photo, Bob kept something he hadn't looked at in nearly 40 years. A small card with a phone number and the words, "Emergency contact only, MARSOC Recon Team Eagle." Throughout decades of nightmares, the death of his wife, through every hardship, Bob had never used that number. Pride, perhaps, or the belief that a man handles his own troubles. But today, something had broken inside him. Not his body, which had endured far worse, but a certain faith in his fellow Americans, a belief that under surface differences, a basic respect existed for those who had served. From his pocket, Bob withdrew his phone. His fingers, stiff from age and his recent fall, trembled as he punched in the number from the card. He expected nothing. 40 years was a lifetime. The number would be disconnected, the people behind it long retired or dead, but something compelled him to try. Perhaps the same instinct that kept him alive in combat when others fell. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, crisp, alert, professionally neutral. Verification code? Bob hadn't expected an answer. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Then, reaching back through decades of memory, he recalled the response protocol. Eagle 6 Delta, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Robert Anderson. A pause on the other end. Then, with unmistakable recognition, stand by for confirmation, Master Sergeant Anderson. Bob sat very still on the park bench. The phone pressed his ear as another voice came on the line, older, authoritative, with the unmistakable tone of command. Bob Anderson. It's been a long time. Too long, Colonel. Bob replied, suddenly transported back to another life. What's your situation, Master Sergeant? Bob took a deep breath. I need the team, sir. No questions followed. No request for explanations. Only 3 words that made something long dormant within Bob's chest unfurl like a flag catching the wind. Help is coming. 200 miles away, at the Marine Special Operations Veterans Association headquarters, Colonel Richard Harmon, 70 and retired for 15 years, activated a protocol that hadn't been used in over a decade. Eagle Team Emergency Assembly, he announced over secure line. Robert Anderson has made contact. Within minutes, phones rang in 5 different locations across 3 states. Men in their 60s and 70s received the call. None asked questions. None made excuses. They simply acknowledged and acted. In a suburban home in Pennsylvania, retired gunnery Sergeant James Reeves opened a cabinet that his grandchildren had never seen unlocked. Inside was a Marine Corps dress uniform, still maintained, still ready. In a Virginia medical office, Dr. Michael Thomas, once the unit's medic, told his receptionist to cancel his appointments due to a family emergency. From different directions, different lives, they converged, drawn by a bond forged and fired decades ago. Meanwhile, in the park, Bob remained on his bench. The bleeding from his temple had stopped, but exhaustion from the day's events weighed heavily on him. His eyes drifted closed occasionally, not in sleep, but in the half-alert rest that combat veterans never fully unlearn. The first black SUV arrived 67 minutes after Bob's call. It entered the park with deliberate speed, its tinted windows and military veteran plates the only indications it wasn't a typical family vehicle. 3 minutes later, a second SUV arrived from the opposite direction, then a third, a fourth, a fifth. They positioned themselves in a perfect perimeter around the park's central area, cutting off easy exit routes. It was a containment pattern Bob recognized immediately. He had helped develop it during operations in Beirut. The park fell strangely silent. Conversations died mid-sentence. Children stopped playing. People sensed something significant unfolding. Without speaking to each other, the men from the vehicles converged on Bob's position. They weren't young, but they moved with purpose and confidence that belied their gray hair. Each wore a simple polo shirt bearing the Marine Corps emblem. Each carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had faced death and retained the absolute certainty of who they were. Colonel Harmon reached Bob first. Though decades had passed since they'd served together, he dropped to one knee before his former comrade, a gesture of respect that spoke volumes. "Master Sergeant Anderson," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the now silent park. "Eagle Team reporting as requested." Bob's stoic expression cracked slightly, a shimmer of emotion in his blue eyes. "You didn't all have to come." "All of us or none of us," replied James Reeves. That was always a rule. Dr. Thomas immediately began examining Bob's injuries. "Who did this?" he asked quietly, the calm question carrying an undertone that made bystanders step back involuntarily. "Some mechanics at Miller's Auto Repair," Bob answered, nodding in the direction of the shop visible just 2 blocks away. "Not worth the trouble." Colonel Harmon rose and looked toward the repair shop. "Let's go have a friendly conversation about customer service." 15 minutes later, the 5 SUVs pulled into Miller's Auto Repair in formation. The mechanics, including Derek, were outside smoking when the vehicles arrived. Their casual posture stiffened as doors opened and the Eagle Team emerged. Colonel Harmon approached the service manager, who had come outside to see what was happening. "Your employees assaulted a decorated combat veteran today," he stated, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Look, we don't want any trouble," the manager stammered, suddenly aware of the growing number of bystanders gathering to watch. "But you were happy to cause it," replied Harmon. Master Sergeant Robert Anderson served 3 combat tours with Marine Special Operations. He was awarded the Navy Cross for Valor in Beirut in 1983 when he carried 3 wounded comrades through active gunfire to safety. By now, local residents had started gathering. Smartphones appeared as people began recording. "He's making that up," Derek said, though his voice lacked conviction. James Reeves stepped forward. From around his neck, he removed what appeared to be dog tags, but as he held them up, a small case attached to them became visible. He opened it to reveal a Navy Cross medal. "In 1983, Reeves stated, Master Sergeant Anderson led a classified operation in Beirut. When their position was compromised, he held off multiple attackers, allowing the wounded to reach safety. Despite being wounded twice himself, he was the last man to evacuate. People in the crowd began to whisper among themselves. Several removed their hats in respect. 5 men came home to their families because of him." Reeves continued, "I was one of them." Derek's bravado crumbled visibly. The other mechanics shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast. Dr. Thomas helped Bob from the SUV. Despite his age and the day's ordeal, Bob stood straight, the military baron returning to his posture, as if the years had fallen away. "We don't want trouble," the service manager repeated, now visibly sweating. Tell me, Colonel Harmon asked, looking directly at Derek. Did assaulting an elderly man make you feel powerful today? Derek swallowed hard, his face flushed with shame. I didn't know who he was. And that makes a difference? Dr. Thomas asked sharply. Would you have respected him if you'd known he was a hero? Or is basic human decency reserved only for those with medals? From one of the SUVs, a uniformed Marine officer emerged, carrying a polished wooden case. He approached Bob with formal precision and opened it to reveal a replacement Navy Cross medal. Master Sergeant Anderson, the officer explained to the gathered crowd. Your original medal was stolen during a home break-in in 1996. The Corps recently authorized this replacement. We've been trying to locate you, sir. Bob stared at the medal and felt the weight of memory press against his chest. His team surrounded him now, just as they had in that bombed-out building decades ago. I never wore for the recognition, Bob said quietly. We know, Colonel Harmon replied. That's exactly why you deserved it. The Veterans Memorial Center filled beyond capacity that evening. Word had spread rapidly, first through social media, then local news. The story of a forgotten hero found after decades of quiet anonymity resonated deeply. Bob sat in the front row, uncomfortable with the attention. His Eagle team surrounded him, these men who had dropped everything to come to his aid, forming a protective honor guard of gray-haired warriors. The town mayor, hastily organizing a recognition ceremony, spoke with genuine emotion. For 20 years, Master Sergeant Anderson has lived among us. He has fixed his own roof, shopped in our stores, and we never recognized a hero in our midst. When it was his turn to speak, Bob rose slowly and faced the gathered crowd. I didn't call my team because I wanted recognition, he said, his voice steady. I called because I needed to remember that there was a time when people stood by each other, when no one got left behind. He paused, looking at the faces before him. Many of the same people who looked away at the repair shop, who had hurried past him on streets for years without a second glance. I don't blame anyone for not knowing who I was. That was my choice, to live quietly. But I do ask that you look more carefully at the veterans in your community. Their stories may not be in history books, but they matter. A young boy broke free from his mother's grasp and approached Bob with a small handmade card. My dad's in Afghanistan, the boy said, offering the card. He says real heroes don't brag about what they did. Bob accepted the card with equal solemnity. Your dad is right, he said. The bravest people I know wear their courage on the inside, where it counts most. The mechanics from Miller's auto repair approached Bob before the ceremony concluded. Derek, subdued and genuinely remorseful, offered not just an apology but a promise. Our shop will provide free maintenance for all veterans from now on, sir. And I'd like to start by fixing your truck, no charge. Bob nodded his acceptance. Redemption, after all, had been at the heart of many of his own life's chapters. As he prepared to drive home in his old Chevrolet pickup, which Derek had already promised to restore to running condition, Bob paused to fix a small sticker to the rear bumper. Proud Marine veteran. It was small, understated, but no longer hidden. Colonel Harmon rested a hand on his old friend's shoulder. Will you be all right, Bob? Bob looked around at the town that had suddenly seen him for the first time in 20 years. I think so, he said thoughtfully. Sometimes you have to fall down to be seen. You never fell, Bob, Harmon corrected gently. You've been standing at attention for 40 years. The rest of us just finally remembered to look up. As the Eagle team prepared to return to their separate lives, they gathered around Bob one last time, not as elderly men with aching joints, but as the brothers they would always be. No matter how many years passed, some bonds remained unbreakable. Have you ever witnessed someone being mistreated because others didn't know their true value? Share your story in the comments, because stories of respect and dignity deserve to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe to remind us daily. Respect never goes out of style.